You know, when a major public figure dies unexpectedly, it really forces a country to look in the mirror. But it's rare that the fallout is as fast or as fiercely divided as what happened after the death of Charlie Kirk. So today, we're going to break down how one man's death became a battle for the soul of a nation. So, who was he? Well, at just 31 years old, Kirk was this colossal figure in conservative media. The founder of Turning Point USA, he had the ear of presidents and a huge following, especially among young people in the MAGA movement. A lot of people credit him with really helping to swing the youth vote back in 2024. And then came the end, in the most shocking public way you can imagine. He was speaking at a campus event, and he was fatally shot. I mean, the whole thing was caught on video, and it just sent these massive shockwaves across the country, not just because it was so brutal, but because of what it immediately set off. And what happened next? Well, instantly, you had these two completely opposite stories start to form. To his supporters, he was a hero who'd been struck down. But to his critics, he was a demagogue whose violent end was a tragic, but maybe predictable, result of his own words. And that's the conflict we're digging into here. All right, first up, let's really set the scene here. The country wasn't just grieving a death, it was fighting over a life, and what that life actually stood for. The reaction was like a perfect mirror of America's deepest divisions. So on one side, you immediately have this narrative of him being a martyr. His supporters, his family, his allies in the Christian nationalist movement, they all started framing his death as a sacrifice for his faith and for his conservative principles. And then you've got the complete flip side. His critics were basically saying, look, you can't separate how he died from how he lived. They argued he'd built a career on rhetoric that was incendiary, divisive, and just plain dangerous, and that he was fanning the flames of hatred. Okay, so let's dive into that first narrative, this image of Charlie Kirk as a champion of traditional American values. How do his supporters want us to remember him? A huge piece of this image, right, was Kirk as the family man. He and his wife, Erica, were always out there championing marriage and parenthood. They were pitching it as this really important, meaningful mission for young men, not some old-fashioned thing to avoid. Now, this is really interesting. His supporters positioned him as a direct answer to influencers like Andrew Tate. So while Tate was telling young men that marriage is basically a trap, Kirk was trying to rebrand family life as the ultimate positive, a way for men to find real purpose. And this quote here, it really gets to the other core part of that patriot story. Kirk as this champion of civil debate. You'll hear his supporters point to his campus tours and his famous Prove Me Wrong challenge as proof that he was a principled guy who cared about logic, not just getting people angry. But, and this is a huge but, his critics tell a totally different story. They say you just can't square that image of a respectful debater with his actual public record. And his critics say that record is just filled with statements that blow up that whole civil discourse idea. They point to comments like this one about black pilots as basically promoting racial prejudice, just hiding it behind questions about diversity programs. And it wasn't just about race. They pointed to his comments on women, too, like this message he had for Taylor Swift just a month before he died. His critics didn't see that as just traditional values. They saw it as straight-up misogyny, telling women to be subservient. And then, and this is a really big one, there's his rhetoric on immigration. Critics say that when he explicitly endorsed what's known as the Great Replacement Theory, he was taking a white nationalist conspiracy theory and pushing it into the mainstream, framing demographic change as some kind of deliberate plot. So, what's the ideology connecting all these statements? Well, critics argue Kirk was more and more embracing Christian nationalism. They kind of track his journey from being this more standard, free market conservative to a full-blown culture warrior who saw politics as a spiritual war for the soul of a Christian America. And look, for anyone who thought he was just a professional pot stirrer, this moment was everything. This is the man who built his entire brand on open debate. And here he was, refusing to answer questions under oath from Congress about his organization's role in what happened on January 6th. All right, so that brings us to the battle for his memory after he died. And this effort to frame him as a martyr kicked off right away. And man, it was powerful. His widow, Erica Kirk, actually called her own grief a battle cry. So these words weren't just about her personal loss. To their followers, this was a call to arms. It was casting his death as a kind of holy sacrifice for the cause. And the religious leaders in his circle? They didn't even bother with subtext. They just said it out loud. Pastor Sean Fooch used this ancient Christian saying, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church." They were explicitly framing his assassination as the spark that was meant to fire up their base and push their political goals forward. Faster. But his critics look at all this and see something much darker, with deep historical roots. Sociologist Saida Grundy compares the immediate rush to make him a hero to the lost cause myth of the Confederacy. Basically, a calculated campaign to make a divisive, extremist ideology look heroic and put it totally beyond criticism. So, here we are, left with two legacies that are just at war with each other. It really makes you wonder, which one is it? I mean, think about it. Was he an apostle of discourse, a Christian role model who was martyred for his beliefs? Or was he a professional agitator, a wolf in sheep's clothing who normalized cruelty? His supporters and his detractors have their answers, and there is absolutely no middle ground. In the end, you realize the fight over Charlie Kirk's memory isn't really about him at all. It's about the country he left behind. Because when a society can't even agree on whether someone was a force for good or a force for evil, the real question it forces us to ask is, what does that say about the country itself?